There was a time when buying music wasn't as simple as opening Spotify. You'd head into town, spend an hour browsing shelves of CDs, listen to new albums through giant headphones, and maybe leave with the latest game or DVD. If you grew up in Britain during the 90s or early 2000s, chances are that place was Virgin Megastores. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when buying music meant leaving the house. Before streaming, before downloads, before smartphones. If you wanted to hear the latest album from your favorite band, you had one option. Go to a record shop. Back in the late 1960s, Britain's music scene was booming. Bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin were dominating the charts, and record sales were climbing year after year. Music wasn't just entertainment anymore, it had become part of people's identity. But shopping for records wasn't always an enjoyable experience. Many record shops felt formal, expensive, and intimidating, especially for younger customers. Staff stood behind the counter, records were often kept out of reach, and browsing wasn't exactly encouraged. Then along came a young entrepreneur with a very different idea. His name was Richard Branson. At just 20 years old, Branson started a small mail-order record business, selling albums at lower prices than many high-street retailers. It was simple, but it worked. Customers loved the cheaper prices, and orders quickly started flooding in. Encouraged by that success, he opened the very first Virgin record shop on Oxford Street in 1971. And it didn't feel like a traditional shop at all. Instead of bright fluorescent lights and strict sales assistants, Virgin created a relaxed atmosphere. Customers could spend hours browsing shelves, chatting about music, discovering new artists, and simply hanging out. There were sofas to sit on, music playing throughout the store, and staff who were genuine music fans rather than just salespeople. Virgin wasn't trying to be another record shop, it wanted to become the place where music lovers gathered. And that approach proved hugely successful. As demand for records continued to explode throughout the 1970s, Virgin began opening more stores across Britain. What started as one small record shop was quickly becoming one of the country's most recognizable music retailers. But this was only the beginning. The real explosion was still to come. Virgin's first store was a hit. What had started as a small record shop in London quickly became something much bigger. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Virgin opened more stores across the UK, attracting a new generation of music lovers. The brand built a reputation for doing things differently. While many retailers focused on simply selling products, Virgin focused on creating an experience. The stores were bigger, louder, and more exciting than the competition. You didn't just pop in to buy an album, you went to browse, discover new artists, and spend time with friends. As the business grew, so did its ambitions. Vinyl records gave way to cassette tapes, and then, in the 1980s, a new format arrived that would change the industry forever: the compact disc. CDs promised better sound quality, greater durability, and the ability to skip tracks at the touch of a button. Consumers embraced the new technology, often replacing entire vinyl collections with the same albums on CD. For Virgin, it was the perfect opportunity. The company expanded its stores to sell far more than just music. Shelves filled with films, computer games, books, headphones, and the latest electronics. Many stores even featured listening stations, gaming demos, and dedicated areas where customers could discover new releases before buying. Some locations became attractions in their own right. The flagship store on Oxford Street became one of the most famous music shops in Britain, while internationally, giant Virgin Megastores opened in cities like New York City and Paris, helping turn the brand into a global name. By the early 1990s, Virgin Megastores wasn't simply competing with other record shops. It was becoming one of the biggest entertainment retailers in the world. Everything seemed to be going in one direction: up, but the years ahead would bring a revolution that no music retailer could ignore. By the late 1990s, Virgin Megastores wasn't just successful, it was at the heart of British pop culture. This was the era before streaming, before YouTube, and before smartphones. If you wanted the latest album, you couldn't just press play. You had to go out and buy it. And that's exactly what millions of people did. Every Friday and Saturday, Virgin stores were packed with shoppers. Teenagers spent their pocket money on the latest CDs, parents browsed for birthday presents, and families queued up for the newest games and DVDs. Walking into a Virgin Megastore was an experience in itself. Rows upon rows of music stretched across the shop floor. Giant posters advertised the biggest new releases. Listening stations let customers sample albums before buying, while the gaming section buzzed with people trying the latest consoles. The stores became destinations, not just shops. If a major artist released a new album, Virgin often hosted midnight openings or signing events. Fans would queue for hours just to be among the first through the doors. The timing couldn't have been better. Britain was in the middle of a musical boom. Oasis and Blur were battling for chart supremacy during the Britpop era. Pop groups like Spice Girls and Westlife were selling millions of albums. Meanwhile, DVDs were replacing VHS tapes, and the Sony PlayStation had transformed gaming into a mainstream hobby. Virgin sold all of it: music, films, games, books, accessories. For many people, it was impossible to leave empty-handed. At its peak, Virgin Megastores had grown into a global retail powerhouse, with stores in major cities around the world and millions of customers walking through its doors every year. It looked unstoppable. But beneath the surface, the world was beginning to change. A new technology was emerging that would completely transform the way people listened to music. And Virgin wasn't ready for it. Every successful business eventually faces a moment that changes everything. For Virgin Megastores, that moment arrived with the internet. At first, the warning signs were easy to ignore. CD sales were still strong, stores were still busy, and new releases continued to draw huge crowds. But behind the scenes, a completely different way of listening to music was beginning to emerge. Instead of buying albums, people were discovering MP3 files. For the first time, thousands of songs could be stored on a single device, and with a decent internet connection, they could be downloaded in minutes. Then came file-sharing services like Napster. Almost overnight, millions of people realized they could access music without ever stepping foot inside a record shop. The music industry was thrown into chaos as record labels fought back with lawsuits, but the damage had already been done. Consumers had tasted convenience, and they weren't going back. Even those who wanted to buy music legally had more options than ever before. Online retailers like Amazon could sell CDs cheaper because they didn't have expensive high-street stores to run. Supermarkets began using chart albums as loss leaders, often selling them for less than specialist music retailers could match. Virgin Megastores was suddenly being squeezed from every direction. Its giant flagship stores, once its greatest strength, had become incredibly expensive to operate. Rent, business rates, and staffing costs kept rising, while customers were buying fewer CDs every year. The company had built its empire around people coming through the front doors. But increasingly, they weren't coming through the doors at all. They were buying music with a mouse click instead. And an even bigger threat was just around the corner. One company wasn't about to change how people bought music. It was about to change whether they bought albums at all. In 2001, everything changed. Apple Inc. launched the iPod. It wasn't the first MP3 player, but it was the first one people really wanted. Suddenly, you could carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. No CDs, no bulky cases, no scratched discs, just your entire music collection on one small device. Then, 2 years later, Apple introduced iTunes. This was the real game changer. For decades, the music industry had been built around albums. If you wanted one hit song, you usually had to buy the entire CD. iTunes changed that overnight. For less than £1, you could buy exactly the song you wanted and download it instantly. There was no need to drive into town, no need to queue, and no need to browse shelves for an album that might be out of stock. For retailers like Virgin Megastores, it was a nightmare. Their entire business depended on people walking into large stores and leaving with physical products. But consumers were rapidly embracing a world where music was instant, digital, and available from the comfort of home. The shift happened faster than many expected. Every year, fewer CDs were sold. More people downloaded music. Streaming services were beginning to emerge, and the writing was on the wall. Virgin Megastores wasn't just competing with another shop anymore, it was competing with technology itself. And technology was winning. The business had reached a crossroads, but instead of reinventing itself, something else happened. The Virgin name disappeared from Britain's high streets altogether. By the mid-2000s, it was becoming clear that the golden age of the music megastore was over. CD sales were falling, competition was increasing, and the huge flagship stores that had once symbolized Virgin's success were becoming expensive to run. But here's something many people don't realize. Virgin Megastores didn't actually go bust. Instead, in 2007, the UK business was sold. The stores were bought by a management buyout backed by investment firm Luke Johnson, and because they could no longer use the Virgin brand, they were renamed Zavvi. To most shoppers, not much seemed to change. The shelves still held the latest albums, films, and games. The staff were largely the same. The stores looked familiar, only the sign above the door was different. But the problems that had been building for years hadn't gone away. Customers were still moving online, downloads were replacing CDs, and high street retailers were fighting over a shrinking market. Then, just as the newly named Zavvi was trying to find its feet, disaster struck. Its main supplier was Woolworths Group. When Woolworths collapsed into administration in late 2008, its wholesale division, which supplied Zavvi with much of its stock, collapsed with it. Almost overnight, Zavvi struggled to get new CDs, DVDs, and games onto its shelves. Just weeks before Christmas, one of the busiest shopping periods of the year, many stores simply didn't have enough products to sell. It was a devastating blow. Within months, Zavvi itself entered administration. Store after store closed their doors for the final time. What had once been Britain's most famous music retailer had disappeared from the high street. Not because people stopped loving music, but because the way people bought it had changed forever. Today, it's difficult to explain just how important Virgin Megastores once was. For an entire generation, it wasn't just somewhere to buy music. It was where you discovered it. People would spend hours browsing the shelves, listening to albums through giant headphones, reading the back of CD cases, or meeting friends before heading into town. It was an experience that simply doesn't exist anymore. Today, almost every song ever recorded is available instantly through streaming services. Films are downloaded in seconds, games are bought digitally, and the idea of traveling into town just to buy an album feels almost unimaginable. In many ways, Virgin Megastores didn't fail because it was a bad business. It failed because it was built for a world that no longer existed. The internet changed how we discovered music. The iPod changed how we carried it. Streaming changed whether we owned it at all. Virgin wasn't the only company caught out by those changes, but it became one of the most recognizable casualties of the digital revolution. Its story is a reminder that even the biggest brands can disappear if they fail to adapt quickly enough. Because in business, success today doesn't guarantee survival tomorrow, and sometimes, the businesses we remember most fondly are the ones that never saw the future coming. If you remember spending hours in Virgin Megastores, let me know your favorite memory in the comments below. And if there's another forgotten business you'd like to see on the Business Autopsy table, subscribe and let me know. There's plenty more